On a peaceful suburban street, Jack Turner's otherwise uneventful day as a garbage collector was suddenly transformed when he encountered a strange sight. A trash bag discarded with brand new, unused children's items. His curiosity got the better of him, but just moments later, a sobbing little girl burst out of the house, clutching his leg, begging for help. "Please, save me," her voice rang out, full of desperation. Before he could understand what was happening, Jack realized he was tangled in a story far darker than a struggling family. A mother ensnared in fear, a father consumed by violence, and a child grappling with horrors no one could fathom. The once peaceful neighborhood became a bloody portrait of despair, and Jack, the garbage collector, found himself facing a choice: remain silent or intervene and protect the innocent. With courage tested, Jack embarks on a journey not only to save a family but to confront the terrifying darkness he never imagined he'd encounter. Can he uncover the truth behind this family's secrets? This is a tale of sacrifice, love, and irreversible decisions. The story begins. Jack Turner drove his garbage truck through the quiet streets of the suburban neighborhood. The morning sunlight cast long shadows across the neatly trimmed lawns and well-maintained houses. He glanced at the clock on the dashboard, 8:30 a.m., 45 minutes later than his usual schedule. This delay weighed heavily on him, a constant reminder that his usual punctuality had been interrupted by the sudden illness of his usual partner and the lack of a substitute. Driving the large vehicle alone, Jack thought about his 3 years on the job. Every movement he made was practiced and efficient, even working solo, the result of the experience gained from countless rushed mornings on these familiar streets. The riverside neighborhood stretched out before him, its clean and orderly appearance in stark contrast to the utilitarian look of his garbage truck. Jack took pride in his work, fully understanding the vital role he played in keeping the community clean and running smoothly. He knew every street, every turn, even the routines of many residents along his route. It was this familiarity that made the delay today all the more frustrating. He prided himself on punctuality and efficiency, and this setback made him feel as though his professional pride had been wounded. As he approached the next house, Jack saw a woman and a girl getting out of a car and heading inside. He had become familiar with them over the years of his daily garbage runs. The woman, Ryan, and her daughter, Linda, were regular faces in his routine. Normally, Jack would exchange a friendly greeting with the residents he encountered. It was a small gesture, but one that made his job more enjoyable and helped foster a sense of community. However, today something felt off. As Ryan and Linda entered their home, Jack called out a warm greeting, but their response was different. It was short, tense, and unsettling. Linda kept her head down, avoiding his gaze, while Ryan merely offered a curt, strained hello. The exchange lacked the warmth and friendliness he had come to expect, leaving Jack with an uneasy feeling. As he returned the trash can to its proper place, his mind lingered on the strange interaction. Despite his growing concern about their odd behavior, Linda's downcast expression and Ryan's hurried manner kept haunting him. He told himself that everyone has difficult days, that he shouldn't let it bother him. Maybe they were in a rush or dealing with personal family matters. Jack tried to convince himself not to overthink it as he continued collecting their trash. After all, his job was simply to collect the trash and move on, maintaining professionalism while still being friendly and approachable. As Jack lifted Ryan and Linda's trash can, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The weight of the can felt unusual, heavier than normal. He chided himself, attributing it to his imagination, the disruption of the morning, and the strange conversation with them. But as he expertly maneuvered the trash can toward the mechanical arm of the truck, he caught a glimpse of his reflection in the truck's rearview mirror. The dark circles under his eyes were evidence of the early mornings and long hours his job required. Yet, in his gaze, there was also a sense of determination, a pride in the important work he was doing. Jack was operating the garbage truck, his hand poised to press the button to dump Ryan's can into the truck when something caught his eye. A loosely tied garbage bag was turned over, revealing its contents. The sight made him freeze, his hand hovering in midair. New children's clothes, still tagged, a complete school uniform, a backpack, and unused school supplies were stacked on top of new toys. This discovery made Jack stop breathing, his usual professionalism giving way to curiosity and concern. Jack stood by the truck, deep in thought. His schedule was already behind, and he usually kept a professional distance from the items residents threw away. It wasn't his place to question what people discarded, but the wastefulness of these brand new items left him perplexed, especially knowing there were charity centers in the area. He thought of the children in the nearby slums, children who could use these things. As Jack stood there, his mind raced with a series of possibilities. Why would Ryan throw away such new items? It seemed wasteful, completely out of character for a family he thought he knew so well. He wondered if they were aware of the local donation centers where those items could be of use to others. The thought of these things being discarded weighed heavily on him. It was an unsettling feeling, pulling him between his professional duties and his growing moral dilemma. On one side was his schedule, the rules that governed his work, and on the other, the undeniable urge that something was off. Ryan and Linda's strange behavior, combined with his discovery, painted a picture full of suspicion that he couldn't simply ignore. After a moment of contemplation, Jack made his decision. He stopped the mechanical arm just before it crushed the items. With clear resolve, he retrieved the bag from the trash. Despite the delay, he was determined to go knock on Ryan's door. It was a significant departure from his usual protocol, driven by a sense of unease and a desire to prevent unnecessary waste. As he approached the front door, bag in hand, Jack mentally rehearsed what he would say. He didn't want to upset Ryan or invade her privacy, but he felt compelled to inform her about the donation centers in the area. He knocked, and after no answer, he rang the doorbell twice before the door finally opened. Ryan appeared, and Jack was taken aback by her disheveled appearance. She looked flustered, not at all like the composed woman he was used to seeing. In fact, she looked more disarrayed than when he had seen her just minutes earlier outside. The shift unsettled him. "Mrs. Miller," Jack began, his voice soft and apologetic, "I'm sorry to bother you, but I couldn't help but notice the items in your trash." He held up the bag, revealing its contents. "I don't mean to invade your privacy, but the bag was loosely tied, and I thought you might not know about the local donation centers, where these things could be of help to others." Ryan's response was startlingly hostile. Her eyes narrowed, and her voice turned sharp. "It's none of your business," she cut in, her tone laced with anger. "What I throw away is my decision. You had no right to go through my trash." Jack was taken aback by the intensity of her fury, and he tried to explain himself. "I'm sorry if I overstepped, I just thought that," but Ryan interrupted him again. "If you need them so badly, take them," she snapped, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and fear. "But leave us alone." Jack stepped back, his brows furrowed in confusion at the outburst he hadn't anticipated. Ryan, the same woman who had always greeted him calmly and courteously during his weekly trash pickups, was now a completely different person. Not only was she angry, but she seemed to be hiding something deeper, an anxiety that Jack couldn't quite place. He looked at her, trying to decipher the defensive glare in her eyes. Why was she reacting this way? He wondered. The items in the bag, old toys, a fraying sweater, and a picture frame with no photo, weren't anything out of the ordinary. But Ryan's response made Jack feel that these discarded things held some significance, something he couldn't understand. Just as Ryan went to shut the door, a loud noise came from inside the house. The sound of breaking glass startled both of them. They both rushed to look inside, and for a brief moment, Jack caught a flicker of fear in Ryan's expression before she slammed the door shut. Jack stood there, stunned by the sudden shift in behavior. The unease he'd felt earlier had transformed into genuine fear. Clearly, something was wrong, but what could he do? He stood there for a long moment, unsure whether he should call the police. The silence from inside the house only fueled his hesitation. Jack returned to the truck, his mind in turmoil with conflicting thoughts. The feeling of something being wrong still lingered regarding the discarded new items, so he decided to place the bag in the passenger seat instead of throwing it in the back. As he climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine, it felt as though he was leaving something unresolved behind. As the truck moved on to the next house, Jack's professional training battled with his personal instincts. He had a job to do, a schedule to maintain, but Ryan's fearful expression and the sound of breaking glass echoed in his mind. He found himself glancing back at her house through the rearview mirror, wondering if he should have done more, said more, or tried to help in some way. The weight of the bag in the passenger seat seemed to press down on him, a physical reminder of the ethical struggle he was facing. As Jack continued with his work, he couldn't shake the feeling that what had started as an ordinary Thursday morning had suddenly taken a turn. He moved from one house to the next, performing the familiar tasks of his job, lifting trash bins, operating the mechanical arm of the truck, returning the empty containers to their rightful place, which gave him a small sense of normalcy, but his mind was still preoccupied with his strange encounter with Ryan. As he reached a house 5 doors down from Ryan's, the barking of a neighbor's dog from behind a fence became the backdrop to his surroundings. Jack went through the motions of lifting another trash bin, his movements automatic, while his thoughts drifted back to the unusual events of the morning. The familiar weight of the trash bin, the smell of refuse, the sound of the truck's engine, everything seemed off today, tinted with the anxiety and confusion gnawing at him. Suddenly, a small figure darted out from between 2 parked cars. Before Jack could process what was happening, Linda appeared, wrapping her arms tightly around his leg. The unexpected sight startled him as he struggled to hold onto the heavy bin while a child clung to him. Carefully, Jack set the bin down, his heart racing from the surprise. He paused the mechanical arm and removed his work gloves, bending down to meet Linda's gaze. As he looked closely at her, he saw that she was wearing a pristine blue floral dress, as though she were ready for an outing, but her tear-streaked face and trembling form told a different story, one of deep fear. "Please help me," Linda pleaded, her voice breaking through the quiet morning air. She pointed toward her house, her small hand trembling as it directed him. Jack's professional demeanor evaporated when he saw the obvious panic in the young girl. His actions slowed, his movements becoming gentle as he checked her over for any injuries. Despite her tears, he found no signs of physical harm, but the worry on Linda's face was palpable, amplified by the incessant barking coming from the yard next door, adding tension to the already uneasy situation. "Linda, what's going on?" Jack asked softly, trying to keep his tone calm and reassuring. "Are you hurt? Where's your mom?" Linda's emotional state only deepened with his questions. Her sobs and hiccuping cries made it impossible for her to provide a clear answer, leaving Jack uncertain of how to proceed. He continued to comfort her, hoping to uncover the cause of her overwhelming fear. Slowly, he began to guide her back toward the house, hoping to find Ryan and get to the bottom of what had happened. However, Linda resisted, pulling back and trying to avoid his gentle guidance. Her fear was so strong that it only deepened Jack's concern. What had happened in the short time since he'd left their house to make Linda so terrified? As they walked, Jack tried once more to talk to Linda. "It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe now, all right? Can you tell me what happened? Is there something that scared you?" Linda's responses were only more unintelligible sobs, punctuated by fragments of words. "Mom, Dad, scared." A cold chill ran down Jack's spine. The pieces of the puzzle began to fit together. The new items in the trash, Ryan's disheveled appearance, the sound of glass breaking, and now Linda's terror. Something was seriously wrong in that house. As they neared Linda's house, Jack heard the sound of a door slamming shut. Jack looked up to see a man walking out of the house, his steps purposeful and full of challenge. Instinctively, Jack positioned himself between the man and Linda, though he still didn't fully understand the situation. As the man drew nearer, Jack realized he was tall and well-dressed in a pricey suit, a stark contrast to Jack's work uniform. The man's face twisted with fury, his eyes locked on Linda, who was cowering behind Jack. The man approached, shouting with a commanding tone, "What are you doing with my daughter?" His voice was filled with accusation and barely restrained rage. Linda clutched Jack's leg tighter, her small body trembling. Jack tried to keep his composure, responding calmly, "Sir, your daughter came to me, clearly distressed. I'm just trying to help." The man cut him off, his attitude shifting from threatening to outright contempt as he looked at Jack's trash collector uniform. "Help? What could someone like you possibly help with?" His words dripped with immediate prejudice. You have no business interfering with my family. Know your place, trash collector. The verbal assault continued, each word dripping with disdain. You probably can't do more than pick up trash with your limited mind. Did you even finish high school, or were you too busy with your own problems? The weight of the man's words was palpable, and Jack could feel the scorn cutting into him, a reminder of the harsh realities faced by those in his line of work. Yet, through it all, he stood firm, still uncertain of what had transpired behind those walls, but convinced that something was horribly amiss. Jack's teeth clenched, and the man's words struck him like a punch to the face. He had faced discrimination before, but never in such a blatant and brutal form. He could feel Linda's small hands still clutching the fabric of his uniform, her body trembling as she hid behind him. The father's attitude grew more hostile. I'll call your company right now, or better yet, I'll call the police. A criminal like you dares to touch my daughter? Don't you dare interfere in my family's business. Jack fought fiercely inside, every instinct screaming to protect himself, to retaliate against these unfair accusations, but he knew any outburst could be misunderstood. Linda was still with him, and if he lost control or confronted the man, it would only make things worse. Despite the father's continued provocations, Jack forced himself to stay calm. He realized that any impulsive reaction would only reinforce the racial prejudices, making the situation even worse for Linda. Taking a deep breath, he tried to steady his racing mind. Sir, Jack began, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside him, I understand you're angry, but your daughter came to me asking for help. I just want to make sure she's safe. The father scoffed. She doesn't need help from someone like you. He reached out to grab Linda, but she recoiled, clinging tightly to Jack. Jack felt his heart wrenched. He knew he had no legal right to keep Linda, but every sense he had told him something was terribly wrong. Reluctantly, he turned to Linda and crouched down to meet her eyes. His voice faltered, filled with regret. Linda, I'm sorry. I can't protect you. The words shattered like dust, each one making his heart crack a little more. You should go home with your father, okay? Linda looked up at him, her eyes wide with fear and betrayal. The father reached for her again, pushing her toward the house. Linda suddenly pulled away and ran back toward Jack, who was now near his truck. Please don't, Linda, she cried, her voice full of desperation. Don't make me go back. I'd rather die than go with him. My dad is bad. Jack froze, his hands still resting on the truck door. The shock of the words from such a small child sent a chill down his spine. He realized his initial instinct had been right. No child should feel that desperate and terrified in the presence of their own father. In that moment, Jack knew he couldn't walk away. The red flags were now waving fiercely, and Jack understood the situation was far more serious than he had initially thought. He stood there, Linda clutching him, and the father's glare like a dagger aimed directly at them. Jack knew his next move would determine everything. No matter what consequences he might face, no matter how it might endanger his job, he couldn't abandon the child who had trusted him. Jack stood firm, shielding Linda as she huddled behind him, his stance resolute but not aggressive. He was acutely aware of the delicate balance he had to maintain, protect Linda without crossing any legal boundaries or further provoking the father. The father advanced, his face contorted in rage. You don't have the right to interfere. Hand my daughter over, or I'll have you arrested. Jack raised both hands, showing calm but firm resolve. Sir, please step back. You're scaring your daughter. Let's talk this through calmly. The man's eyes narrowed dangerously. Talk? There's nothing to talk about. I'm calling the cops right now. You'll lose your job over this, you piece of trash. As the father reached for his phone, Jack made a quick decision. Go ahead and call, his voice steady, but I'll be calling child services. I suspect there's something wrong in your house because your daughter is terrified. The words, child services, immediately caused a shift in the father's demeanor. His face went pale, and for a moment, the aggressive facade cracked, revealing a flicker of fear. He backed away, dropping his phone and heading back inside the house. Jack felt a brief sense of victory, but the problem was far from over. What was he supposed to do with the girl while the father was still in the house? Taking her away was impossible, and as he pondered his next move, he didn't have time to act before the front door slammed open with a loud bang. The scene before Jack froze him in place. The father stepped out again, this time dragging a woman, Ryan. The sight of her made Jack's blood run cold. Her face was badly bruised, one eye barely open, though the one eye that remained open was pleading silently for help. As she was forced into the car, Jack stood frozen for a moment, the shock of the situation rendering him almost paralyzed. He had suspected something was wrong, but the reality was far worse than he had imagined. Before he could react, the father shoved Ryan into the car and sped off, tires screeching against the pavement. Linda's fear was now more apparent than ever. She tugged on Jack's hand, pleading, "Please save my mom, don't let him hurt her anymore." Still reeling from what he had just witnessed, Jack knelt beside Linda. "Linda, I need you to tell me everything. Can you do that?" The little girl seemed too terrified to form coherent words, her body trembling with fear and adrenaline. Jack realized he needed to adjust his approach and soften his tone. "If it's too hard, can you just show me?" Linda nodded, her tiny hands still gripping his tightly. As she led him toward the house, though his work still lingered, waiting for him, Jack knew he couldn't ignore the clear signs of domestic violence. He had already crossed a line, and there was no turning back now. As they neared the front door, Jack's senses were on high alert. He heard the crunch of broken glass underfoot and smelled a putrid odor wafting from the open door. Standing in the doorway, Jack stared at the scene in front of him, his heart sinking with every detail. Inside the house, the violence spoke volumes that words could never fully convey. Shards of glass and broken wood were scattered across the floor, creating a perilous path through what should have been a warm home. Family photos were shattered, their happy faces now fractured, missing pieces. Broken chairs lay in a heap, a testament to a violent struggle. But what struck Jack most were the crushed suitcases near the door, clothes, personal items, and important papers strewn about. The scene spoke of a hurried escape or a forced departure, and it made Jack's heart ache for Ryan and Linda. The desire to uncover the full story behind it all gripped him tightly. Turning to Linda, who stood silently beside him, still holding onto his hand, Jack spoke gently. "Linda, the only way I can help you is by calling the police. What do you think?" She nodded, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and hope. With Linda's consent, Jack pulled out his phone and dialed 911. As he waited for the call to connect, he took a deep breath, mentally preparing for what lay ahead. He knew the actions he took today would have far-reaching consequences, not just for Linda and Ryan, but for himself as well. But looking down at the frightened girl beside him, Jack was certain he was doing the right thing. When the dispatcher answered, Jack's voice was steady, despite the chaos around him. Years of dealing with stress in his line of work had taught him how to remain calm and relay information clearly and concisely. He described in detail the violent scene he had witnessed and the abduction of Ryan, stressing the urgency of the situation. Throughout the call, Jack kept an arm protectively around Linda, acutely aware of the pain she had endured and the courage she was showing. He silently vowed to do whatever it took to see this through, no matter the cost to his job, his safety, or anything else. It was nothing compared to keeping this child safe and getting her back to her mother. The sound of police sirens pierced the quiet morning, growing louder with each passing second. Within minutes, several patrol cars arrived, their flashing lights illuminating the street. Officers quickly took control of the scene, their presence bringing a measure of order to the chaos that had erupted in this otherwise peaceful neighborhood. Linda refused to go inside, clinging tightly to Jack, who remained outside with her while the police investigated. Her eyes darted nervously between the officers and the house, as though she were waiting for her father to appear at any moment. A female officer, her hair touched with gray at the temples, stepped outside to speak with them. She crouched down to Linda's level, her voice gentle as she introduced herself. "Hi, Linda, I'm Officer Olivia. Can you tell me what happened?" Linda's lower lip quivered as she spoke in a voice barely above a whisper, her words just loud enough for Jack to hear. "Daddy took Mommy away. Daddy hurt Mommy really bad. I'm scared I'll never see Mommy again." She paused, her small hand clenching into a fist. He's worse than a monster. He can really hurt Mommy. Officer Olivia's face grew serious as she listened to the young girl. She turned to Jack, and he quickly recounted everything he had witnessed: the father's aggression, Ryan's visible injuries, and their hasty departure. "We appreciate you calling us, sir," Officer Olivia said to Jack, then spoke into her radio, notifying her team about the father's abduction of the injured mother. She turned back to look at Jack and Linda. "We'll be securing the surrounding roads, which will help us catch him faster. Can you provide information about the vehicle, its make, model, or any description of his appearance?" Jack took a deep breath, trying to recall the details. "It's a dark blue sedan, an older model. I didn't catch the license plate, but the front left bumper is dented. As for him, he's about 6 feet 1 inch, average build, wearing a black suit and pants. His hair is short and smooth, and he has a beard. That's all I remember." As other officers stepped out of the house with serious expressions, the kind officer gently asked, "Linda, sweetheart, can you tell me more about what happened? Has your dad ever hurt your mom before?" Linda nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. She began recounting, using her simple words, adding more details about her father's alcoholism, the divorce he couldn't accept, and his habit of returning to terrorize her and her mother. "He gets really angry when he drinks," the little girl said, "and he drinks a lot." The officer nodded sympathetically, jotting down notes. "Linda, is there anyone else your dad might want to hurt? Do you have any siblings?" Linda shook her head, but then her eyes widened with worry. "Grandma," she exclaimed. "She lives nearby, just a few blocks away. We were just at her house this morning. What if he goes there?" The officer immediately relayed this information to her colleagues. The police team quickly split into 2 groups. One stayed to secure the scene, while the other, under the guidance of a senior officer, prepared to check the grandmother's house. "Linda," the officer said, crouching down to her level, "we need to check on your grandmother. Would you be able to help us find her house?" Linda hesitated, glancing up at Jack with fear in her eyes. She had clung to him like a lifeline and didn't want to leave his side. Jack, sensing her unease, made a swift decision. "I'll follow in my garbage truck," he said, looking at both Linda and the officers. "I know I'm behind schedule, but I can't leave Linda now. I promise I'll see this through." The officers exchanged a look, clearly surprised by the commitment of the garbage collector. After a moment, they nodded in agreement. Linda, comforted by Jack's promise, finally agreed to get into the police car. As Linda climbed into the back seat of the patrol car, Jack quickly ran back to his garbage truck. He knew he was running late and that there would be consequences for his actions today. But as he started the engine and followed the police cars, he felt a greater sense of purpose than the daily grind. A small convoy formed, with the police car leading, Linda safe inside, followed by Jack in his garbage truck. Though it was an unusual sight, the convoy moved swiftly through the neighborhood, each participant driven by the urgency to prevent another victim from being harmed. As the vehicles moved, Jack's mind raced. He thought about Ryan, hoping she was safe and that the police would find her soon. He worried for Linda, placing the little girl in a horrific situation no child should ever have to endure. And he couldn't stop thinking about the consequences his actions might have on his job and his life. But as he followed the flashing lights of the police cars, cutting through the familiar suburban streets, Jack felt a deep conviction that he was doing the right thing. No matter what happened next, he knew he couldn't live with himself if he turned away from Linda's plea for help. As the convoy of police cars and Jack's garbage truck turned into the hidden corner of the grandmother's alley, a tense scene was unfolding. The father's car was parked diagonally at the entrance, one wheel on the lawn. On the porch, the father stood, his expensive suit now wrinkled, his face twisted in rage as he screamed out demands. "Open the door!" he yelled, his voice echoing across the quiet neighborhood. "I know you have the passports. Give them to me now, or I'll smash this door in." Jack saw Ryan still trapped inside the car, her condition deteriorating rapidly. Her head was slumped against the car window, and even from a distance, the bruises on her face were visible. The chaos had attracted the attention of the neighbors, forming a small crowd watching the unfolding drama. Some stood on their lawns, whispering to each other, while others sneaked peeks through their curtains. The bolder ones had already pulled out their phones, recording the scene. The father noticed the growing crowd and, instantly turning towards them, shouted in fury. "Mind your own business," he yelled, grabbing a small decorative stone from the yard and throwing it toward the onlookers, sending them scattering. As the sound of police sirens grew louder, his anger shifted to panic. He rushed toward the car, clearly intending to flee with Ryan still inside. Thinking quickly, Jack made a snap decision. He accelerated the garbage truck, driving it straight to block the entrance, effectively trapping the father's car between his truck and the approaching police vehicles. The screech of tires echoed in the air as the police surrounded the house, officers jumping out with weapons drawn. "Get out of the vehicle and raise your hands," an officer commanded over the loudspeaker. A tense moment passed, as it seemed the father might try to ram his way through the barricade. But the presence of so many officers with guns aimed at him dissolved any sense of bravado. Slowly he opened the car door and stepped out, his hands raised as the officers moved in to arrest him. The father's eyes locked onto Jack, who had just exited the garbage truck. "You," he spat, his face twisted in a snarl of hatred. "This is all your fault. You're trash and I'll ruin you for this. You'll never have a job in this town again." The officers quickly pulled the enraged man away, shielding Jack from his verbal assault. Still, the words sent a cold shiver down Jack's spine. He knew that, despite doing the right thing, today's actions might have serious consequences for his career and his life. Just then, Linda emerged from the police car, her small face a mix of relief and fear as she took in the scene. When she saw her mother still trapped in the car, Linda rushed forward, knocking on the window urgently. "Mom, are you okay?" Ryan stirred slightly at the sound of her daughter's voice, but seemed too weak to respond. A gentle officer pulled Linda back, explaining that medical personnel would assist her mother soon. As Linda was led away, the father's demeanor shifted unexpectedly. The previously fierce man now crumbled to his knees on the grass, tears streaming down his face as he cried out her name. "Linda, sweetheart, I love you. It's all just one big misunderstanding." Jack felt a wave of conflicting emotions. Part of him wanted to believe the sincerity in the man's tears, hoping that beneath the anger and violence, there was a father who truly loved his child. But the image of Ryan's battered face and the fear in Linda's eyes were seared into his memory. He reminded himself that abusers often employ emotional manipulation as a tactic. The officers also seemed uncertain, their faces a mix of skepticism and confusion as they dealt with the crying man. They maintained their professionalism, cuffing him despite his pleas and tears. Meanwhile, other officers had retrieved the keys from the father's resistant hands and finally freed Ryan from the car. Jack, with Linda by his side, moved forward to help bring Ryan to the porch. The little girl clutched his hand, her eyes never leaving her mother's face. As they approached the porch, the front door opened, revealing an elderly woman, Linda's grandmother. The grandmother's face showed worry and fear, but when she saw her daughter and granddaughter, her expression softened with relief. "Oh, thank God," she sighed, rushing forward to embrace Ryan. She led them to a chair on the porch, where Ryan collapsed onto the nearby seat. The grandmother quickly brought a glass of water and some ice wrapped in a towel for Ryan's swollen face. Linda stayed close to her mother, her small hand gently placed on Ryan's arm as if reassuring herself that her mother was truly safe. Jack stood nearby, feeling both relieved that the immediate danger had passed and anxious about what would come next. As Ryan drank the water, her color slowly returned to normal, but Jack couldn't shake the tumult of emotions. Relief that Ryan and Linda were safe, anger at the abuse they had endured, and worry over the consequences his actions might have on his own life. The atmosphere on the grandmother's porch grew heavy with unsaid truths. Ryan, now more awake after drinking water and receiving care from her mother, sat on the outdoor wicker chair, Linda curled up beside her, clinging tightly to her. Jack stood nearby, feeling both like an intruder and an inseparable part of this family moment. An officer approached the porch to take Ryan's statement, introducing himself as Officer Foster. His gentle eyes and calm demeanor were in stark contrast to the violence they had all just endured. "Mrs. Miller," he began, his voice soft but professional, I know this is difficult, but we need to understand what happened. Can you tell me about your relationship with your husband? Ryan took a deep breath, wincing slightly from the pain in her ribs. As her strength returned, she began recounting their past, a story unfolding slowly like a tragedy. We've been married for 10 years, Ryan started, her voice barely above a whisper. At first, everything was perfect. Brian was charming, successful, and seemed like the ideal husband, the ideal father. She paused, absent-mindedly brushing Linda's hair. But everything changed. His success at work was also when he fell into addiction. The work pressure led him to drink excessively. Ryan's voice grew stronger as she continued, as though letting out long-held secrets gave her back some of her power. It started with verbal abuse, belittling, controlling behavior, isolating me from friends and family. Then came the physical threats, throwing things, punching walls. I kept making excuses, believing he would change. Linda sniffled softly, and Ryan held her even tighter. The breaking point came 4 years ago, when Linda witnessed one of his outbursts. I knew at that moment I had to leave for her, if not for myself. We divorced, but Brian... She choked up, tears welling in her eyes. He couldn't accept the separation. He showed up unexpectedly, wanting to control me and Linda. I had a restraining order, but... She pointed to the bruise on her face. As you can see, he thought his wealth and influence could protect him from any consequences. Officer Foster's expression hardened slightly as he took notes. No one is above the law, Mrs. Miller, he said gently but firmly. Can you tell me about the events leading up to today? Ryan nodded, taking another sip of water before continuing. Last week, Brian begged me for one last chance. He said he'd seen a therapist and suddenly came up with the idea of a family vacation to heal our relationship. He showed up this morning, but I found out he was drunk, reeking of alcohol. She stopped, her hand trembling as she set the glass down. That's when I knew nothing had changed. While he was still drunk, I quickly hid Linda's and my passports at my mother's house, here. Ryan took a deep breath before continuing. That's when Jack saw me and greeted me. As I came home, Brian woke up, drunk and furious. He went crazy when he found out I no longer wanted to go on the family vacation with him because of his state. He was drunk again and became violent when he found out we had hidden our passports. Her voice broke as she continued the next part. He said he would take Linda, and that the passports didn't matter because he had connections who could make her disappear. But thanks to Jack, he wasn't able to do that. Instead, Ryan pointed to the bruise on her face, unable to finish her sentence. Officer Foster's face remained a professional mask, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of anger at the situation. Thank you, Mrs. Miller, he said softly. Your bravery in sharing this will help us build a strong case against your ex-husband. At that moment, Brian's voice rang out from the street, loud and insistent. This is a misunderstanding. What she's saying isn't true. Officer Foster excused himself and stepped off the porch, moving toward the street. Jack watched as he spoke firmly to Brian, still handcuffed and surrounded by other officers, but seeming to regain some of his earlier arrogance. Brian's voice echoed in the open air. We're divorced, yes, but I never hit her. I just wanted a family trip. Ryan is the one who hid the passports and threw away my gifts. She just doesn't want to see me bonding with Linda. Ryan's face paled, but she remained silent. Jack felt his anger flare at Brian's audacity and moved toward the officer. Sir, if I may, I would like to provide testimony. I witnessed his racist behavior toward me and Linda, the extreme fear she has of him, and there's one more thing. He explained about the new items he had rescued from the trash earlier that morning. Officer Foster turned back to look at Ryan. Mrs. Miller, did your husband bring all those new items, the uniform and backpack for Linda? Ryan nodded, her eyes wide as she realized the significance of this. Yes, he brought all those things. The uniform and backpack were for Linda because he planned to take her away and transfer her to a new school somewhere I don't know. Officer Foster raised an eyebrow at this new information. Turner, Jack supplied the name. Mr. Turner, your statement could be pivotal in this. We'll need you to come to the station to provide a formal statement. At that moment, another officer stepped onto the porch. "We've tested Mr. Miller's blood alcohol level. He's well over the legal limit." The investigating officer nodded, his face turning serious. "That's clear. We'll be arresting him on multiple charges: driving under the influence, domestic abuse, violation of a restraining order, and attempted kidnapping." As the officer left to complete the arrest, Officer Foster turned back to Ryan and Linda. "Mrs. Miller, we'll need you and Linda to come to the station for your statements. Is there anyone who can accompany you?" Ryan's mother stepped forward. "I'll go with them." The officer nodded in agreement. He then turned to Jack. "Mr. Turner, we appreciate your involvement in this case. Your actions today may have saved 2 lives. However, I understand you were on duty when this unfolded." Jack nodded, suddenly remembering the work he had left unfinished and the potential consequences it could have on his job. "Yes, sir. I'll probably need to contact the company and explain the situation." As the group prepared to head to the station, Jack couldn't help but feel a swirl of mixed emotions: relief that Ryan and Linda were safe, pride in knowing he did the right thing, but also anxiety about what this meant for his job and future. As he followed the police cars and his garbage truck toward an uncertain future, Jack knew that, whatever the consequences, he would make the same decision again in a heartbeat. The police station was busy with officers processing Brian's arrest and investigators working to finalize the statements from Ryan, Linda, and Jack. The garbage bag containing various items had been seized by law enforcement as evidence. The cold fluorescent lights and the impersonal walls of the building stood in stark contrast to the peaceful suburban streets where Jack's day had begun, a sharp reminder of how swiftly everything had changed in just a few hours. Ryan sat in a chair, holding an ice pack to her face, while Linda curled up next to her. Ryan's mother, Susan, stood nearby, occasionally offering words of comfort and casting worried glances at her daughter and granddaughter. Jack stood a short distance away, feeling slightly out of place in his worker's uniform amidst a sea of officers and detectives, waiting for the formalities to be completed. Ryan caught Jack's gaze and motioned for him to come closer. Her voice was gentle but filled with gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you. You put yourself in harm's way to help us, and probably jeopardized your job. I'm sorry for dragging you into this family crisis." Jack shook his head, a faint smile on his lips. "Don't apologize. I'm just glad you and Linda are safe. That's the most important thing." Ryan's eyes welled up with tears, but she remained silent. "However, you didn't have to get involved. Most people wouldn't." "I've been picking up your trash for 3 years, Jack replied, his voice softening a little, "but it's only now that I've seen you in this situation. I couldn't just walk away." A faint smile flickered across Ryan's bruised face. "It wasn't a coincidence that you showed up later than usual today, was it?" Jack chuckled lightly. "You noticed I was late?" "Of course," Ryan answered. "I also noticed you didn't have a partner with you." Jack nodded, contemplating the irony of it all. "This is the first time I've worked alone, without a partner. The events today make it hard not to think. There's a bigger reason behind it all." Ryan smiled, her gaze softening. "I want to believe that too, that someone's looking out for us." Their conversation was interrupted when a detective approached, handing each of them a sheet of paper to sign their statements. As Ryan and Jack signed, Ryan glanced at Jack. "When all of this is over, when things are peaceful again, I want to thank you properly. Maybe dinner." Jack, taken aback by the offer, nodded. "I'd like that. And don't hesitate to call if you need anything." He grinned proudly. "Though I do hope you'll never need my help again. It'd probably be a bad situation, considering your financial situation is better than mine." The attempt to ease the mood succeeded when Ryan genuinely laughed. It was a brief, light moment in a tense situation, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there is space for connection and hope. "No, Jack, we need each other," Ryan said as the officer invited them to leave and thanked them for their contributions. Jack's phone buzzed in his pocket, and he pulled it out to see the company's number on the screen. Taking a deep breath, he answered the call, preparing himself for any consequences that might arise from his actions today. "Hello, this is Jack," he said, his voice calm despite the turmoil inside. "Jack, it's Emily from HR," the voice on the other end replied. "We've been trying to reach you. The GPS on your truck shows you went off route, and we've received calls about missed pickups. What happened?" Jack inhaled deeply and began explaining the events of the morning. He described how, while working, he encountered an unexpected situation and had to rescue a family from a threat. He then shared the entire story. "Thanks for reaching out. I know I didn't finish my route on time, but this morning's situation really made it impossible for me to continue my normal work. I just wanted to do the right thing." What surprised and reassured him was Emily's response, full of understanding instead of reprimand. "I understand," she said after he finished. "It's a tough situation. Once you complete your paperwork at the station, you can finish the remaining pickups. We'll need to discuss this further when you return to the yard." Jack exhaled with relief, somewhat surprised by Emily's reaction. "Thank you, Emily. I really didn't expect such understanding. I know my work affects the company's schedule, but I couldn't just turn my back on what was happening." "Jack," Emily said gently, her voice a little warmer, "we understand that sometimes unpredictable situations arise. The company appreciates employees like you, who are willing to do what they think is right, even in difficult circumstances. But the work still needs to continue, and we need to make sure everything gets back on track. You can continue with your route, but we'll need to talk more when you return." As the call ended, Jack felt a little less burdened. While he knew there might still be consequences for abandoning his route, the initial response gave him hope that his job might not be in jeopardy. With the immediate crisis behind them and official statements completed, Jack was ready to get back to work. As he prepared to leave, Linda ran toward him, her eyes lighting up as she saw him. "Jack," she called, rushing toward him. "Are you leaving? Can we come with you?" Ryan, following closely behind, looked uncertain. "Oh, Linda, I don't think that's a good idea." But Jack, seeing the hopeful look in Linda's eyes, unexpectedly nodded. "As long as your mom agrees, I don't see why not. It might be cramped and smell a little, but—" Susan, the grandmother, overhearing the conversation, chimed in with a light-hearted joke. "I think it'll be fine. I can come along too. We can always take a shower later, and when else will we get the chance to ride in a garbage truck?" Linda said, her eyes full of excitement. Seeing the enthusiasm in her daughter's eyes, Ryan finally relented. "All right, if Jack doesn't mind, it's better than calling a cab." So, in a surprising twist, Jack found himself helping Ryan, Linda, and Susan climb into the cab of his garbage truck. As the truck pulled away from the police station's parking lot, Jack couldn't help but be astounded by the strange turn of events throughout the day. The ride back to their neighborhood was filled with mixed emotions in the cramped space. Linda's occasional questions and comments about how the truck worked provided light moments, while Ryan's quiet gratitude and Susan's support brought a sense of hope rather than fear, filling the air in the cab with warmth and closeness. As the truck neared their street, Jack felt a sense of completeness. What had begun with him running late now brought him back to this neighborhood under entirely different circumstances. When the truck finally arrived at Ryan and Linda's house, now quiet in the afternoon light, Jack helped them out. Before they went inside, Linda turned around and hugged Jack tightly, a gesture of gratitude that moved him deeply. Ryan, with her arm around Linda's shoulders, looked at Jack with a look full of gratitude and something more, perhaps newfound respect or understanding. "Thank you, Jack," she said softly, "for everything. You truly have a pure heart, serving the community in many ways." As Jack watched them walk into the house, Susan trailing behind, he felt a profound sense of satisfaction. The comment about his service to the community echoed in his mind, not only shedding light on his actions today but also affirming the dignity of his everyday work and its importance to the development of the community. Climbing back into the truck, Jack took a moment to reflect on the day's events. He knew there were many challenges ahead, explaining himself to his superiors, potentially dealing with legal procedures as a witness, and facing the repercussions of Brian's threats. But as he started the engine and prepared to continue his route, Jack felt a sense of calm. No matter what came next, he knew that today he had made a difference, and that would fuel him to face whatever lay ahead. With a deep breath and a look of determination, Jack drove on, ready to tackle the rest of The day. There was still a long road ahead, but he was prepared to face it with newfound pride and purpose in his work, not only as a garbage collector but also as a member of the community. This story serves as a reminder of the importance of compassion and courage in the face of adversity. If you were in Jack's shoes, what would you do to protect the right values in a challenging situation? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice could inspire and help others overcome their own struggles. If this story has touched your heart, don't forget to share it with your friends and loved ones to spread the message of resilience, sacrifice, and responsibility. Thank you for supporting the channel. Please like, share, and subscribe to receive the latest updates. The stories are collected from various sources and do not represent any individual or organization. They are shared with the intention of spreading human values in life and have been rewritten with the support of AI. If there are any mistakes, kindly overlook them with understanding. Wishing you all the best in life.